Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Coach's Corner. This is week 5 of our spring 2018 ELC. As a reminder, we do have a synchronous meeting this week on Thursday at 8:30 p.m. in our meeting room. I do hope you can make it. If not, please be sure to watch the archive and submit a 3-2-1 reflection. This week's topic is on virtual classroom management and some strategies and best practices to use to make sure your coaching sessions are fun, engaging, and a positive experience for all of our students. Our coaching classrooms need to be fun, positive, and engaging places in order to allow students to practice their language skills with us. In this video, we will cover best practices for engaging coaching sessions, positive feedback, tips for struggling students, handling student discipline issues, and some FERPA reminders. One of the biggest challenges of coaching is that we have very limited time to work with students. We have 90 minutes a week to engage with them and have them practice their speaking skills as well as their listening skills and reading and writing skills. So we need to make sure that our coaching sessions are fun and engaging so that our students are focused on what they're doing and are getting the practice time in they need to succeed. So here are some best practices that I want to recommend in order to have engaging coaching sessions with your students. One of the best ways I've found that I've built rapport and good relationships with my students is to discuss culture. So I like to take 5 minutes in the beginning of every session to discuss culture and something related to what we might be learning, or maybe something that the students just show an interest in. It allows us to build connections with the students, and it creates a way to show them a real-world connection between what they're learning in class and things that actually happen out in the real world. It's important to make sure that you know your coaching materials as well as Adobe Connect. We can do that by previewing our content before going to coaching in order to make sure that we know what the students will be working with and how they can move through their exercises. We also need to be very comfortable using the Adobe Connect platform. If you need a refresher on how to use any of the tools and any of the functionalities in Adobe Connect, there are training videos that you can reference, and I will make sure that I link them in this week's discussion content. It's also a good idea to use the tools to engage students that we have through Adobe Connect. For example, the chat, the polling feature, screen share, and webcam. All of these can be used to create a more dynamic and engaging environment for the students, so they're more likely to focus on their coaching and less likely to be looking at their smartphones or the internet. It's a good idea to keep the pace moving along quickly, not only because we usually have a lot of material to cover with the students, but it also helps to keep them engaged and focused. If coaching sessions move at a slow pace, students might be more likely to lose attention and focus on other activities. It's also a good idea to call on students at random in order to keep them on their toes. This is a strategy that I personally implement in my coaching sessions to make sure that my students are paying attention because they never know if they could be the next person to be called on. Finally, have fun, but keep it professional. It's okay to make jokes with students and have fun during coaching, but we want to make sure that we're covering the material they need to learn and that they're getting plenty of practice time in. So we need to make sure that we have our boundaries set accordingly. As coaches, it's extremely important to use positive feedback with our students regularly. We always want to give lots of praise as well as encouragement during coaching session. Keep in mind that coaching typically pulls students outside of their comfort zones. Students are sometimes very cautious whenever they're speaking a new language for fear of making a mistake and potentially looking silly in front of their classmates. So we want to make sure that if a student makes a mistake, that we give them the positive feedback, we appreciate them for their trying, and then we also provide them the feedback they need to continue to improve. So we want to make sure that we're using a lot of positive feedback in order to encourage students to keep trying, to persevere through their challenges, and to continue to attend coaching. Positive feedback is a great way for coaches to build rapport with students. So the more positive feedback we can give to our students, the better our relationships will be with them. I think it's safe to say that in some point of every student's academic career, they will face some type of a challenge or a struggle with some of the content that they need to learn. If we think back to our own experiences in school, we can remember times where we might have struggled with something or maybe had a hard time learning something. This can create feelings of uneasiness or dread or simply wanting to avoid working on that subject altogether. So coaches need to be mindful of this and make sure that we use specific strategies in order to help students overcome their struggles and continue to keep trying. Here's a list of tips that I've compiled in order to help students who are struggling. First, and perhaps most important, never criticize a student. When a student provides an answer and then is criticized for their output, they might be more likely to shut down and not want to put forth any more effort because they were criticized. So it's really important that we never resort to criticism when students are struggling. Also, we never want to exclude a struggling student. In the online world, it can be easy for students who are struggling to stay somewhat hidden and not engage with their class. So we want to make sure that we're including the struggling student and not excluding them. Always maintain a sense of calmness and composure. Never let your frustrations show. So if coaches are frustrated with students and students can tell that, and believe me, students are very perceptive, then they have a tendency to not want to engage with the coach. So always make sure you're calm, composed, and showing appreciation for the students. If a student's struggling, it can be a good idea to allow a little time for the student to think and formulate an answer, but always be quick to help. This is important because, one, if a student is hanging out and trying to come up with an answer and spinning their wheels and not getting anywhere, they're going to feel frustrated. So if a coach can chime in rather quickly and provide some assistance, that's going to help them to continue to move with that forward momentum and continue to output. It can also be frustrating for other students that are following along with the class and understand what's going on if we're taking a long time to allow a student to think. So it basically creates an environment of dead air where students are going to be much more tempted to check Facebook or see what's going on Twitter. It's also important to avoid going into long, detailed explanations on what a student is doing wrong. One, because it kind of singles a student out who's struggling, but also the best place for students to receive instruction is from their teacher. So we want to make sure that the teachers are the ones doing the detailed instructions and the coaches are simply allowing the students to practice and then providing some feedback on how to continue to improve, but without going into detailed explanations. The most important things are to always show respect and appreciation for all students, regardless of whether or not they're struggling, and to look for and nurture the good. Again, this is why positive feedback is really important. If students are getting the positive feedback, even if they're struggling, they're more likely to keep trying and keep engaging with you. As we look for and nurture the good, when we compliment students on their improvements and how they're doing things better, not only does it help the students, but it also helps the coach to realize that we are making progress with the students. So always look for and nurture the good with students. I've also come up with a list of struggling student strategies to implement when working with students that are really struggling and not producing the output that we're looking for. One tactic that I use is to try to give a hint. Sometimes that's enough to just get the momentum rolling forward so that they're able to output something. And even if it's not exactly right, we can at least give them some feedback on what they're doing versus just that dead silence. Another strategy I like to use is to give a student a choice between the correct answer and their incorrect answer. This strategy can be really helpful when the student makes a small mistake. For example, maybe they use the incorrect verb conjugation. In this situation, we can give positive praise for what they did well and then say, for example, would we want to use, then say the verb that they said, or would we want to use and then say the correct verb? So that way students are able to see that they did well in everything else, but maybe they need to just change a small part of something. Another great strategy I use is to give part of the answer. So if a student is looking at something and they're not outputting anything at all, and they seem to really be struggling, we can give them part of the answer and see if they can come up with the rest of the answer on their own. If that's not working, if the student isn't producing output after that, it's best to just go ahead and give the entire answer and then have the student repeat. This way they're at least getting some practice with the language and we're not having them struggle and continue to try to come up with something if it's not coming easily to them. For students that are continuing to struggle, sometimes I find it's helpful to do an example together. So for example, if you're moving into a new activity and you have a list of questions, call on the student to do the first one with you together and help that student put that together with you. That way they're getting some practice and they feel like they are able to accomplish something on their own, even if it's with your help. Again, always make sure you follow up with a lot of praise and show appreciation for the output that the student created. Finally, make a note in the attendance document for the teacher to follow up. The teacher will want to reach out to the student to see if they're having trouble and see what they can do to help them continue to improve. The students taking world language courses at NCVPS are great, and it's very rare that we have discipline issues during coaching. But in the event that they arise, we'll want to make sure that we're following the proper protocols. We expect students to be active participants in coaching and to only be making positive contributions to their coaching sessions. If a student's disruptive, you'll want to make sure that you warn them and let them know that that behavior is not appropriate and they need to focus on the task at hand. Allen confirmed that coaches can remove students from coaching sessions if the disruptions continue and the student does not heed the warnings. Even if a student is not removed from class, you'll want to make sure to contact the teacher afterward if you have a student being disruptive or disrespectful toward a coach or a fellow student. The teacher will handle the disciplinary action along with our instructional director and any stakeholders that need to be involved. Finally, I wanted to go through some important FERPA reminders to make sure that coaches are continuing to be compliant with the law. FERPA, or the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, is a federal law that protects confidentiality of student educational records. FERPA law prohibits schools from providing personally identifiable information in education records without the written consent of the parents or guardians if the student is under 18, and without the consent of the student if the student is over 18. All NCVPS staff members must comply with FERPA, as compliance is tied to federal funding. To review, what exactly is personally identifiable information? These can be direct or indirect. Direct being things like student name, like full first and last name, their social security number, or student identification number. Indirect could be things like gender, race, birthday, and anything else that could potentially reveal their identity. A few best practices for coaching sessions in order to stay compliant with FERPA are to keep student interaction as anonymous as possible. Do not permit students to use webcams for themselves. Be mindful of archiving. Turn off the archive if a student needs to discuss something with you in private. Keep the use of chat to a minimum, especially when it's related to outside things unrelated to class. And actively monitor chat and clear it if needed. With students, it's important to make sure that we're following all of our communication guidelines as well. Any written communication with students must always occur either in the chat box in coaching or in Canvas. Make sure to CC whatever parties your department requires when you message and respond to student messages. It's also important to create a new Canvas message if a student ever sends confidential information in a Canvas message to you. We never want to reply off of that original message that contains the confidential information. Finally, never share sensitive information, especially related to exceptionalities or IEP 504 plans in any form of written communication unless it's password protected. We need to password protect and then either call or text the person to receive that communication with the password. Never send the password via email. If you have any questions or need any help with any of these topics, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, and I look forward to seeing you at our live session this week on Thursday, April 26th at 8:30 p.m. Thank you very much for watching and have a great week.